Luke had always had the habit of staying up late. He liked binge-watching series, playing video games, and scrolling through his phone before finally falling asleep. It was a peaceful routine until something bizarre started happening every night. The phone rang exactly at 3 a.m. When he answered, all he heard was a deep silence, as if someone was on the other end of the line, not saying anything. He hung up, thinking it was a wrong number. The next night, at the same time, the phone rang again. This time, the heavy breathing on the other end was unmistakable. Someone was there, listening to him breathe. Hello? Who is this? No answer, just breathing. Uncomfortable, Luke hung up. From that night on, the calls became more frequent, always at the same time, always from the same unknown number. One night, he decided to record the call. As soon as he answered, the voice on the other end finally spoke. It was his own voice. Why are you ignoring me? Shocked, he hung up the phone and stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what was happening. It didn't make sense. The next day, while reviewing the recording, he realized something worse was happening. In the audio, after his own voice spoke, there was another message, a faint voice. I'm here. Look at the door. Luke's heart raced with trembling hands. He looked at the door to his bedroom, and then the phone rang again. Luke stared at the door, his whole body freezing in fear. The phone still vibrated in his hand, persistent. He gathered his courage and turned off the phone screen, trying to convince himself it was just a cruel prank. But when he looked back at the door, he noticed something he hadn't before. The doorknob was turning, slowly, as if someone outside was trying to open the door without making a sound. Luke's heart skipped a beat. He grabbed his phone with trembling hands and started dialing the police, but before he could press the call button, the phone vibrated once more. It was a message. Why did you lock the door? But he hadn't locked the door. The doorknob stopped turning. But before he could breathe a sigh of relief, a noise came from under the bed. A faint sound, like something scraping against the floor. Luke, trembling, slowly crouched down and peered into the dark space under the bed. And then he saw it, his own eyes staring back at him. He opened his mouth to scream, but before he could make a sound, the phone rang again. The screen flashed with a new name on the caller ID. It was his own name. His mind couldn't process what was happening. His own eyes were staring at him from under the bed, and the breath he was trying to control became harder with every passing second. The phone vibrated harder, as if there was an urgency he couldn't escape. Desperate, he tried to move, but his body felt paralyzed. The doorknob turned again, and the sound of something scraping the floor grew louder, closer. Panic consumed him. He couldn't tell what was real and what was illusion anymore. The moment the door opened, the phone finally stopped vibrating. Luke was still shaking, his eyes fixed on the bed. That's when he realized the person staring at him from under the bed wasn't just a copy of him. It was him, but with an empty expression, as if he was there only to watch him. He tried to leave, but the room seemed to stretch until all that was left was darkness. The last thing Luke heard was his own voice, whispering softly, "Now I'm the one in control." Marina was excited for this new chapter in her life. After months of searching, she had finally found a small but cozy apartment on the top floor of an old building. The rent was cheap and the location was perfect, offering a breathtaking view of the city that made her feel at peace. But on her very first night, something felt off. As she got ready for bed, she heard footsteps coming from the floor above. The problem was, there was no floor above. Her apartment was the topmost one. The footsteps were heavy, as if someone was running. Marina tried to brush it off, thinking it could just be the natural creaks of an old building, maybe the wood settling or old pipes shifting. But as the days went by, the sound became louder and more distinct. Now it felt like someone was pacing back and forth, dragging heavy furniture, creating loud, unsettling creaks that echoed through the apartment. Sometimes, she even heard faint whispers, almost too quiet to make out, like someone was murmuring just out of reach. Frightened, she decided to ask the building's janitor if there was any construction going on up there. He just stared at her with a blank expression, as if he had no idea what she was talking about. There's nothing above your apartment. No one lives there. That night, Marina couldn't sleep. The noise grew more intense, more frantic. She curled up in bed as the sound seemed to come from all directions. At one point, curiosity and fear mixed together. Summoning her courage, she grabbed a broom and banged it hard against the ceiling. The noise stopped immediately. For a few seconds, an eerie silence filled the apartment. But then, 3 loud knocks came from above, quick and deliberate, as if someone was responding. It felt like something was communicating with her from a place that was both distant and impossibly close at the same time. She hid under the covers, praying it was all in her head, just exhaustion or stress playing tricks on her. But the worst was yet to come. The following night, as she lay in bed scrolling through her phone, a slight movement on the ceiling caught her eye. A small gap had opened between the wooden planks. On the other side, 2 dark, piercing eyes stared directly at her. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched intensely, as if waiting for a reaction. Marina froze, paralyzed by fear. The eyes were small but unnervingly expressive. Unable to contain her terror any longer, she screamed and bolted out of the apartment. The next day, with her heart still racing and her mind in turmoil, she decided to leave for good. She couldn't live there anymore. But before walking out, she took one last look at the ceiling. The gap was gone. There was no sign of it ever being there, as if it had never existed. She shut the door firmly behind her, leaving behind a mystery that might never be solved.